Did you see where my brother's sitting? Doesn't it look like a house?
Go ahead.
It's okay. Excuse me.
Go ahead, go ahead.
You going?
It's on, but go ahead.
Is this better? Welcome. I'd like to start the evening by introducing Raul, the head of the school, who will welcome all of you.
Good evening. This is an evening that, just by what it is overwhelming. And yet, there is something this evening that is particularly poignant, both because the speaker has a personal connection to the school, and because we are here in our high school for the first time. But what is poignant about that is that we have, for the first time, students who are old enough to be on the March of the Living. And they are there now with the high school head of school, Dr. Hoffman. If one thinks about what an education is about, it is about the past, and it is about the future. And it is deeply touching to reflect on where they are, where we have come from, where we have all collectively come from. And so I thank you for being here and participating in what is so important to Jewish history and in the history of humankind, which is the importance of memory. This Holocaust Committee came together several years ago. It's now lots of years ago as I reflect back. And some of the people who were instrumental in creating it, one I don't know if Trudy Gottesman is here this evening, but whether she's here or not, she certainly deserves a special note. Dina Rosenfeld, who for so many years chaired this committee. And this year's, the co-chairs, both Harry Uveki, who will introduce our speaker a bit later, and Ulrika Citron, who have been very busy putting the evening together. But from its inception, really I must say that Peter Geffen was completely committed to it, devoted to it, and has done incredible work in bringing it to the point that the committee is now. And I want to say a special note of thanks to all of these people. Lily Almog, who is doing the video here this evening, all of you together have helped bring this to the community. I am also deeply moved by seeing students here, past students, present students, and I can't say future students because I haven't looked that closely. But I thank you really for being here with us this evening. And now, Harry Uvegi, I want to again thank you for the work that you've done, for the many things that you do. But tonight, we're very focused on this particular evening. So Harry, if you will come up, please, and start the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Rowena. It is said that praying is talking to God, and meditating is listening to God. And in meditating, there's that silence. And I have a sense that in tonight's silence, we have that ability to bridge the time of past to where we are today, to where we will be. Yom Kippur is known as the Day of Atonement. I feel that this holy day becomes the Day of At-One-ment. At-One-ment with all the souls that we remembered that have perished. And the sense of gratitude that we here today have the ability to experience, the gratitude in which we are all here together for a common purpose of remembering. And it is this moment of remembering that we also receive gratitude from the souls who are here with us tonight. With deep appreciation, acknowledge us for remembering them. And not only the act of remembering them, but also doing something in honor of their memory. I stand here as a child of survivors, remembering my parents and their sharing with me of the families that they had. And it's my responsibility to now share with my children and hope that I have the ability to share with them appropriately what it is that they can take with them to their children. There's this moment that we have too in that with our remembering and with our education and with the hope that our committee that has been in place now for 9 years has brought to the lower, to the middle, and now to the high school a legacy through the archives that we have collected, and that we desire to continue to collect so that we can leave this legacy for the children that will then have a ritual at the time of graduation to hand down to the next generation of children behind them. There's an opportunity with this educational process for us to have an awareness that when we see the seed of evil, that we have the ability to change that to essence of good. And it's through this educational process that we have a desire to put in place, that the children who are on this march will take with them that experience so that we can bring to the future a future filled with creative compassion that will allow to bring forward all the people who survive, who are survivors, that have yet to tell their story. And if the people within our midst tonight have stories to tell us, we are actually yearning to hear those stories. And if you know of people who have stories to tell and have a fear of sharing them, it is with that creative compassion that we would like to have them come forward so that we can leave that legacy, so that the future will be filled with a much joyous, more joyous future for our children. I'd like to call on my son to light the memorial candle. Hugo from the middle school, 7th grade. At this point, I'd like to call on our fellow committee member, Hoffman, who will introduce Dr. Raul Hoffman.
Thank you, Harry and Elizabeth, for organizing this evening. My name is Eleanor Hoffman. I'm the mother of 2 HaShoah graduates. I'm an active member of the HaShoah Holocaust Commemoration Committee, and I'm here tonight to introduce my brother, Raul Hoffman. And let me stop here and just tell you that what I've just said is unusual, and that's because there are many who, like me, were born to survivors well into their childbearing years, who lost siblings before they ever had a chance to know them. But from day one, I've been blessed because I have an older brother. Now, Raul was born in the town of Zlochów, which was then in Poland and is now in the Ukraine, in 1937. His parents, Hillel Safran and Clara Rosen, and our mother sitting here tonight with us, were socialists, Zionists, well-educated, and looked to the world outside for inspiration. They named their son after an explorer, Raul Hoffman, and gave him a Hebrew name as is our tradition, Israel. In 1938, Hitler and Stalin divided up that part of the world. In 1939, Hitler invaded Poland, and the Russians occupied Zlochów and the surrounding region. In 1941, the Germans marched into Russia and also Zlochów. Raul's family was sent to a labor camp, and Raul was there, hidden, kept out of the sight of the Nazis by my mother. They then found a hiding place in the home of a Ukrainian school teacher, someone whose courage, I think, is incredible to imagine. He had a family of his own. And there, Raul and his mother, my mother, were hidden along with 2 of her brothers. Raul's father never made it. He was killed. In 1944, the Russians liberated that part of Poland, and my mother and her son went back to Zlochów. There, my mother met and eventually married another survivor, a man who became my father. And together this family made its way through post-war Europe, through DP camps, through towns in Poland and Czechoslovakia and Austria and Germany, until they came to the United States on Washington's birthday in 1949. Raul was then 11 years old. They settled in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. He went to PS 11, then Stuyvesant High School, Columbia University, and did graduate work at Harvard. Raul has won a lot of awards in his life relating to science, only one of which was the Nobel Prize in 1981. And I want to give you my perspective on that event because I was there, of course, as was my mother, as was Raul's wife and children, and our surviving aunts and uncles from 2 continents. On the one hand, this was the Nobel Prize ceremony full of grandeur and pomp and beauty and majesty. And on the other hand, this was a tremendous family party. I mean, it was a party, we were full of joy, full of emotion. It was, only after 35 years after the war had ended, it was a celebration of life. Since that time, Raul has continued to teach science and lecture and write about science. He's a professor at Cornell University. And he's also expanded into other fields, publishing several volumes of poetry, several nonfiction books. He's written a wonderful play about the discovery of oxygen. He's hosted a television show on chemistry. And one of his latest projects is a National Science Foundation grant to bring Middle Eastern chemists, young chemists together, Arabs, Israelis, Palestinians. I think this is a reflection of his long-time commitment to the view that science, like other aspects of our culture, can transcend barriers that may otherwise divide us. Let me leave you with one last thought. It's a comment Raul once made to me about his experiences as a child, and he probably doesn't remember, but I do, because it stayed in my mind. He said to me that throughout all the horror and all the fear, he felt loved and secure. The adults around him made him feel loved and secure. I thought at the time, and I continue to think, this was a tremendous tribute to my mother and our uncles who were with him during the worst of times. And as a parent, I often remember this as something I can give to my children to help them thrive in a world that's not everything I'd like it to be. And now, please meet my brother, Raul Hoffman.
It's not often one gets introduced by my sister, so this is a very special occasion. I think many of you know the Partisanerlied Tutenstein aus Gegesten letzten Weg. Mit Himmel bläuen über Vorstellen bleibt Kommen weg nach unserer ausgedehnten Schuhe. So that we could dropped Mirzainandu. Mirzainandu is the theme that I want to talk about. That we are here. First of all, we are here, those who survive. We are here in the land of the free, where Jews can be as unreasonable as they are. And we are here to remember. Now, I would like to take you into that land of memory. We are speakers for the dead. But how can one speak for such a multitude? It is impossible. How can one memorialize millions? One cannot. One can do it only through the particular. And I want to take you through the story of a Jewish town, partially Jewish town in Poland. It will be a story that's memory reconstructs, that may be accurate in large part, but perhaps not. And it will also be a story which is as true as I can, and it's not going to be a hagiography. It's a story of one town, one family, one little boy, myself. So Eleanor told you a little bit about the town. The town was called Zlochów, and it is now called Zolochiv. It was a town that went through the history of Poland. So when my mother was born in 1911, it was Austria-Hungary. And when I was born, it was Poland. This is not far from Lemberg, Lvov, we've been to now. In the eastern Poland, now the Ukraine, partway between Lemberg, Lvov, and Tarnopol, another town in that area. After the war, it became the Soviet Union, and now is in Ukraine. The population of this town varied. There were Jews in this town at least 600 years ago, because the oldest stones in the cemetery were that old. But those stones don't survive. I'll come to that. The Jewish population was not a majority. This was not a shtetl. This was not Warszawa or Krakow. This was a typical Polish middle town, not to be romanticized. A town of perhaps 12,000 people, with a population, as far as we can have from the census figures, about 1/3 Polish, 1/3 Ukrainian, and 1/3 Jewish, with a few Ruthenians thrown in for good measure. It was not too far above also Romania and the mountains there. That town, the Jewish population went largely to the Polish schools. There was a thread of Ukrainian nationalism, well justified, because the Poles suppressed them. Above the town there rose a Jagiellonian fortress, a fortress of the Polish kings, exercising its authority over that town. That fortress plays a terrible role later in the story of the Jews during the war. You heard about my father. I will only add that we were a family in transition. That is, the great-grandparents looked like your typical religious Jews of the time. My grandparents, while perhaps still wearing a yarmulke, were perhaps the first generation to speak Polish, despite residing there for 600 years, to speak Polish without an accent. They were shopkeepers. And their children, predictably, were socialists and communists and rightists, and generally departed from religious traditions. They did not depart strongly enough not to give their child a Hebrew name, but they gave him a name which was not the name of my uncles, Abraham or Samuel. They gave them a secular name. There was a little bit of negotiation of Jewish identity there, as in present-day America. How anyone could be a communist living 50 miles from the Soviet border is hard to understand. But if some of them were communists, it's the same thread that runs in the social involvement with the Jews in America. If some of them were communists in their setting, they were quickly disabused of it in 1939, when Poland was divided between the Nazis and the Russians under the Molotov-Ribbentrop Agreement. And we were under a fairly benevolent Russian occupation from 1939 to 1941. I don't remember, but I was 2 to 4 years old. Benevolent for the Jews, not benevolent for the Ukrainians, because the Russians immediately imprisoned all the Ukrainian nationalist leaders and kept the Poles down too. This also plays a part in the story. The real war for us began, I mentioned this socialism and communism. It'll come up during the war. One of the things about socialism and communism, and that thread in Jewish life, an important one for the foundation of Israel, an important one for this country, is that one of the reconstructions of memory is that with the bad behavior of the Soviet Union toward Israel after the beginning years of the State of Israel. The State of Israel owes a lot to those Czech warplanes that reached Havana in the early days. As a result of that, the people who were socialists repressed that in their hate for the Soviet Union and its behavior toward Israel in the subsequent war, not necessarily what went on in our time. The war for us broke out in July 1941. The Germans marched in the few days that the Russians had at that castle. They killed off 100, 200 Ukrainian nationalists, buried them in a mass grave, and ran away. Then the Germans came in, and within 1 week there was a combination of a pogrom and a mass murder by the Germans. The Ukrainians helped the Germans to identify who the Jews were and brought them up. The Germans, this is SS Einsatzgruppe C, one of the murdering machine was not yet perfected. People were simply shot. But actually, what happened, they were made to dig out the mass grave that the Soviets had made for the Ukrainians, disinterred those bodies, and 2,000 Jews, we estimate. The Jewish population of the town had swelled. That figures are very difficult to get, because when the Nazis came into Western Poland, those people, plus people from Austria, our relatives, we were all under the Austro-Hungarian Empire, came up with us. So the Jewish population perhaps swelled to maybe 10,000 people in that period, 39 to 41, from what was a smaller population of permanent residents. In that pogrom, my grandfather, my mother's father, was killed, and my uncle Abraham was buried under the dead and crawled out then, and until the end of his life, about 10 years ago, he carried the remains of a dum-dum bullet in his wrist from being shot on that day. Now I will stop for a moment. I'll continue with the story of the war, because I want to give you a sense for the town and the life in the town, because we are here also to celebrate survival and to talk about life, as well as the unremitting horrors of that period. So this was a typical Jewish town of the Pale of the Settlement, which meant on a religious level that until the 20th century, by and large, the Enlightenment had not yet reached, as it had reached German Jews. People were, of course, religious. There were no other options to that. But in that religious tradition, there was also, since they were Jews, there were Hasidim, and there were those who hated Hasidim. So both were there. It turns out that Zlochov was the home of one of the great masters of the Hasidic tradition, one of the first generation of the followers of the Baal Shem Tov, and this was Yechiel Mechel, the Magi of Zlochov. He died at the end of the 18th century, so we are now back in those days. And I want to read you, died in 1786, I see I've written down there. We don't know when he was born. I want to read you some passages from Yechiel Mechel to get a sense. Now these passages have passed through Martin Buber, and whether it's Martin Buber or Elie Wiesel, it doesn't matter. Everyone reinterprets these things in the light of the teaching but we don't have the much original. But let me read some of the things by him. This is appropriate to the school setting, and since I'm a professor. They asked Rabbi Mechel, in the sayings of the fathers, we read, who is wise? He who learns from all men, as it is said, from all my teachers I have gotten understanding. Then why does it not say, he who learns from every teacher? Rabbi Mechel explained. The master who pronounced these words is intent on having it clear that we can learn not only from those whose occupation is to teach, but from every man, even from one who is ignorant or from one who is wicked. You can gain understanding how to conduct your life. This is basic Hasidic propaganda, that is that the sparks from heaven have fallen, and they are available not only to the learned in a traditional sense, but also to ordinary men. He is a rather stern master, so most of these things are not as interesting into a modern. But let me read you a couple of more just, which are fun. The evil urge once came to him while he was praying. Go away, he said to it, and come back when I am eating. While one is praying, there must be no arguments. And another one, to Rabbi Wilfus Barash, one of his sons, 5 sons, Rabbi Mechel once said, when I had risen in prayer and was standing in the hall of truth, I begged God to grant me that my reason might never proceed against his truth. There was a tradition of scholars of the Torah who were not Hasidim as well in this town, and eventually there arose a secular tradition as well. Out of Zlotchov came Herz Imber, the composer of the Hatikvah in Israel, who ended his life in poor condition in New York City. And out of Zlotchov there came one of the great Yiddish poets of any time. And this is Moshe Leib Halpern. Moshe Leib Halpern emigrated to the United States at age 22 in 1908. He died in 1932. Together with Mani Leib and Moshe Leib Halpern reconstructed Yiddish poetry in that period, and I want to read you a couple of his poems, just to give you an idea. One of his poems is about Zlotchov, but it is, well, let me read you the poem. I'll read you, see. It's not your usual, not what you expect. This is not Second Avenue Yiddish Theater Zlotchov. It's about the town. This is the Zlotchov who chased somebody out. Zlotchov, oh my home, my town, with a steeple, shul, and bath, wives who sit in the marketplace, and little Jews who scramble like dogs around a peasant who's coming down with a basket of eggs from the hill. How life in the spring wakens in me, my poor little bit of yearning for thee, my home Zlotchov. You are my witness, it was really so. When grandfather, helped by the police, put my mother out of the house, my grandmother on widespread feet simpered almost as honey sweet as a peasant girl with 2 soldiers. Cursed be that hatred in me which reminds me of her and of thee, my home Zlotchov. They stood in a ring like naked Jews around a scalded man in a bath, shaking their heads, stroking beards at the thrown-out packs, the rags and tatters and sacks, and the broken remains of a bed my mother is still crying in me, as that time under heaven in thee, my home Zlotchov. Yet the world is a wonderful thing. With horse and wagon over a field, we dragged ourselves to a train that flies like a demon over the land till it reaches a steerage that goes to downtown New York. This is the only solace to me, that I won't be buried in thee, my home's love. Mother got pregnant, and she was chased out of her home. Let me read you another poem by Moshe Leib because it's worth reading. I wish my Yiddish is not as good as it used to be. I once went to a school where everything was taught Yiddish, but let me read you a poem to show you a little bit of this sort of ironic sense of humor that he had, which is the poem's a little bit long, but not too bad. It's called A Bird. So this bird comes, and under his wing is a crutch, and he asks why I keep my door on the latch. So I tell him that right outside the gate many robbers watch and wait to get at the hidden bit of cheese under my seat behind my knees. Then through the keyhole and a crack and a jam, the bird calls out, he's my brother Sam, and tells me I'll never begin to believe how sorely he was made to grieve on shipboard where he had to ride out on deck, he says, from the other side. So I get a whiff of what's in the air and leave that bird just standing there. Meanwhile, because one never knows, I'm keeping on my toes, further pushing my bit of cheese under my seat and toward my knees. The bird bends his wing to shade his eyes, just like my brother Sam, and cries through the keyhole that his luck should shine maybe so blindingly as mine, because he says he's seen my bit of cheese and he'll crack my skull for it. It's not so nice here anymore, so I wiggle slowly toward the door, holding my chair and that bit of cheese under my seat, behind my knees. Quietly, but then as if I care, I ask him whether it's cold out there. They are frozen totally, both his poor ears, he answers me, declaring with a frightful moan that while he lay asleep alone, he ate up his leg, the one he's lost. If I let him in, I can hear the rest. When I hear the words ate up, you can bet that I'm terrified. I almost forget to guard my bit of hidden cheese under my seat there behind my knees. And I reach below, and yes, it's still here, and so I haven't the slightest thing to fear. Then I move that we should try a bout of waiting to see which gives out first. His patience there behind the door, or mine in my house, and more. And I feel I feel that it's funny what a lot of patience I've got. And now I see I have it here. What a lot, and that's the way it stayed. Although it was some 7 years ago, I still call out, "Hi there," through the door. He screams back, "Low there as before, let me out." I plead, "Don't be a louse." And he answers, "Let me in the house." But I know that's what he wants. So I bide my time and let him wait outside. He inquires about the bit of cheese under my seat behind my knees. Scared, I reach down, but yes, it's still there. I haven't the slightest thing to fear. These are offbeat poems. These were, I told you this is not Second Avenue. These were poems also he wrote, poems of Jewish experience. He wrote very strong love poems, a number of other things. There's a beautiful book by Ruth Lissa about A Little Love in Big Manhattan, about those two poets that I mentioned, Moshe Leib and Mani Leib. Back to our story. This is just a little excursion into this town, the life that came from this town, the life that was destroyed by the Nazi occupation. I'll tell you a little bit our story. Eleanor has told it as well. The story of the war. We were perhaps the largest family group that survived in this town, 7 people in all, in 3 different ways. 2 in a bunker in a town, 1 in the forest, who then came in a partisan group, my uncle Frank, who came in then eventually when he got pneumonia, to the group that was hiding in the house of this one good man, Nicola Duke, the school teacher, who hid us out. in this tiny little village about 40 kilometers from the town where we were born. We stayed in hiding from 1942 till January 43 till June 44, when we were freed by the Red Army. We were freed by the forces of evil. A very complicated world. Behind those young, unwilling, 16 to 18-year-old red soldiers riding trucks bearing Stalin's organs, the Katyushas, the rocket-powered mortars. The trucks were Studebaker trucks. It's a very complicated life. Behind those men marched men with machine guns ready to shoot them if those young men departed the polytroops. Yet those men freed us. Without them, we would be dead. We were near the end of our line at that point, and we marched out through the fields to the Russian lines, and my mother carried me through 3 miles of clay to the Russian lines, and my uncles were both too weak. They could barely hold themselves in this. We were in hiding in this place. We never went out for a year and a half. First in an attic, then in a room on the ground floor. And I will read you a poem that I've written from that period. And this is, let's see if I can locate it here. It's called Fields of Vision. From the attic, the boy watched the children playing, but they were always running out of the window frame. And the weathered shutters divided up space, so that he couldn't often tell where the ball Igor kicked. He heard the children call Igor's name would end up. The boy was always moving, one slat to another, trying to make the world come out. He saw Teacher Duke's wife with a basket, then he saw her come back with eggs. He could smell them. Once he saw a fat goose escape from her pen, saved from slaughter, he thought. Once he saw a girl in her embroidered Carpathian vest. He couldn't see the sky. The slats pointed down. He saw the field by the school, always the same field, only snow turned into mud, into grass, into snow. Later the boy grew up, came to America, where he was a good student, praised for his attention to facts. He taught people to look at every distortion of a molecule, why ethylene on iron turned this way, not another. In this world, he thought there must be reasons. His poems were not dreamy, but full of exasperating facts. Still later, he watched his mother, whose eyes were failing, move her head the way he did, to catch or a glimpse, the smallest reflecting shard of light of our world confined. Read another poem. You can see that our mother figures in these things for good reasons. My mother and I have not been back as much, but we will not go back for a while, as I'll tell you in just a moment. But this is a poem about possibly going back, called Flat Stones Beg to be Recycled. We go back, my mother and I, back to Zlocho, where Ukrainian girls in red and black embroidery sing a song, offer us bread and salt, for we are guests in their town, aren't we? But we look down, Clement June turns December, snow begins to fall, outline the scratches in the paving stones so they grow into Hebrew letters. We stand in a minefield. My mother has trouble seeing the snow. The poem poems bring us to memory. The poems are my memory, as far as I can be instructed. Sometimes I feel guilty about writing them in that I don't remember. And so I have to invent details, because poems are about details. They're not about saying things are real. They're about real things that happen. And I feel guilty about inventing them. And until a wise friend told me, don't. Probably by thinking about those things, don't feel guilty. Probably the things that you invent are shards of memory that have come up from that. And perhaps they are true, or more true than the reality in some way. Memory figures also in the minds of the people who remained in that town. Perhaps 200 Jews survived, maybe less. 3 children among them. I'm one of those 3 children. Those children are in the United States. We remember the town has become a Ukrainian town. Actually, it's a complicated series of ethnic shifts here. The Poles, half the Poles left, half of them remained. Russians came in. In there, the Jews were killed. The town then, at the time that the Ukraine, about 10, 12 years ago, the Russians, many of the Russians had left. And so it is a very complicated shifting of things. It is a Ukrainian town with a large Polish population centered around the church there. The memories of the Poles are in this. There are lots of clubs all over Poland formed by the Poles who remember their town. They have published, for instance, a book which lists the graduates of the gymnasium, the high school in this town. And of course, half the graduates are Jewish. It's an authentic list. And so that the memories are very much intertwined with these various communities. But I want to read you a little bit from a correspondence I had with a young Ukrainian historian. And it touches upon this matter of memory, and it's both sad and it's enlightening. So I got this letter in January 1992, so that's a while ago, a few years after the re-establishment of an independent Ukraine. And this is translated from Ukrainian. Writing to you is a scientific worker of the Lvov Art Museum, Miroslava Babinska. I live in Zlocho, the town to which are tied your childhood years. For reasons that are well known, we in Ukraine knew little of the achievements of our countrymen beyond our borders. That Zlocho gave birth to an outstanding scientist, a Nobel laureate, I only got to know this year. As a museum worker, I am occupied now with the re-establishment of the history of our region and the achievements of its heroes. You are one of them, who have made Zlocho famous far away. I think that our museum exhibition would be incomplete without your photograph and the facts of your life. I write to you not knowing whether I can expect your reply, but I know a little of how much you must have suffered during the war. We don't know anything of your family. Please let us know where you lived in Zlocho. Who were your ancestors? What are the names of the people who hid you during the occupation? That hiding was revealed in a number of biographies because I talked about it. And then she says, I'll tell you a little about myself. I'm 30 years old. I'm working on a restoration of the 17th century Zlocho Castle and uncovering of the names and origins of the victims of Stalinist and Hitlerite repressions in Zlocho in 1939 to 1950. The dates are telling here because she's Ukrainian, and as I told you, the period from 39 to 41 was very difficult for the Ukrainians. Similarly, when the Soviets marched back in, because the Ukrainians had collaborated with the Nazis, another story, again, it was a difficult period for the Ukrainian nationalists who are now at power. Okay, so I write to her, and I said, your letter reached me only this month. I was happy to learn of your interest in the history of Zlochov and its people. For those of us who were Jewish, that history ended with the Nazi conquest and the genocide of our people. There is no one left, no one. The few who survived from the Jewish population of around 10,000 in 1941 all left. I suspect that even the inanimate traces of the Jewish presence in Zlochov, our cemeteries, synagogues, have been destroyed. It is sad. But let me return to your efforts to document the history of your town, of my town. Let me answer your questions. I do answer questions. I sent her a book. There are several books that have been written. I sent her books and some records. I tell her the story of my father, how he was killed in the attempt to break out that he organized from the labor camp. One reason we survived is we never were in a concentration camp. We were in a ghetto and in a labor camp. The story of the labor camps has been by and large quiet and not been told sufficiently, because quite justifiably the emphasis has been on the extermination camps. But the labor camps are a large part of the experience of the Jews around there. And then I tell her that, give her some things, and I tell her that what happened in those times cannot be forgotten. It must not be forgotten. So if you can make the people's Zlochov aware that it has had a rich past, that in the past were woven in the lines of Jewish and Polish communities as well as Ukrainian, that would be a real service to your people. From Zlochov there came Rabbi Yechiel Nachum. I tell the story that I told you. We have an exchange, and she says then in the next letter, she says, interestingly, she says that there have been some excavations. I read this because it is interesting. At the castle. And she says that, let's find this little passage here. Yes. Here it is, just a small passage. He says, I don't know if you retain a memory of the castle of Zlochov. This was one of the most terrible fortresses in the Ukraine. Terrible to the Ukrainians, not terrible to the Poles. Here there perished in pain hundreds and maybe thousands of innocent people. In the fall of the past year, in the course of restoration work, we discovered the remains of people under the eastern wall. The inhabitants of Zlochov dug out around 100 bodies of people who had been killed. In all likelihood, these were Jews killed by fascists during the occupation. With them we found personal items, gold objects, even the key to a house. A representative of the Jewish Society also thought there were Jews who had been killed. Now the district attorney is occupied with the matter. Some things were taken for further investigation. Before us is the question of reburial. If uncovered, it was a part of the mass grave that were 2,000 people, including my grandfather, not buried. But it's clear that this young woman, well-intentioned, is operating under no knowledge of the history of the time. So I sent her these books, and she reads them, and it's very interesting to see her deal with them. I also warn her, because we recognize in the names of the current leaders of the town, the family names of some of the people Ukrainians who took part in the pogrom and killed people. The line between communists and Ukrainian nationalists was pretty thin at times. And so I warn her that she should be careful. And she says, I don't need to be careful. But then she says, because times have changed. I'm not convinced. But she writes this. I sent her these books. These books, of course, are written by Jews who remember the period. And they tell the story as people remember it, and they give the names of the Ukrainians who participated in the pogrom, as well as of the Germans who were involved. It's interestingly, we have pictures of the mass killing at the castle, which were taken by a German general who chanced through and took photographs. That German general was subsequently captured by the Russians at the Battle of Stalingrad and turned into a communist and became a leader of the military in East Germany. And after his death, his memoirs were published with the pictures of that man's slaughter. Here is what she writes. A translation was made of the first chapters of the book you sent. In it, there is much information previously unknown to us about the Jews of Zlochov. Of course, not all in life is as simple as in the book, and the authors, among them Polish ones and Ukrainian and Jewish, often do not tell the whole truth. In the book are described facts that really did take place, or the cruel treatment of innocent Jewish families. At the same time, it is not mentioned that the majority of the NKVD, for the young people in the audience, the NKVD was this much feared Soviet secret police. At the same time, it is not mentioned that the majority of the NKVD, who killed many people in a castle in 1939 to 41, the period of Russian occupation, were Jewish. So here is a well-intentioned young Ukrainian historian. Her heart is in the right place. And she is not afraid. I think we know what there is to be afraid for someone who speaks truth in this way. But still she cannot overcome her tradition, her memory, the memory of her people about these same events. Well, so that is something about memory. There is more I could tell you about our wanderings in Europe, about what happened elsewhere after the war. The brief summary is, Elna got the public school wrong. I'm just very I'm very strong on people going to public school. So I want you to know it was PS60 in Brooklyn. Before Stuyvesant High School. I want to, in conclusion, read you just something that I was asked to write for, I think all of you know the story of Daniel Pearl, the Wall Street reporter who was killed in Pakistan, saying that he was Jewish. Judah Pearl asked me to write something afterwards in a book, his father, and dedicated to Daniel. And he asked, not just me, but a number of people the question of what it means to be Jewish. So the book is called I Am Jewish, and here's what I wrote. To be Jewish is to be born in 1937 in the little town in Polish Galicia, Zlochov, and to be given the Hebrew name of Israel ben Hillel Safran. Safran, such a good, an unusual Jewish name. It is a name which, had we emigrated to Israel, we wouldn't even have had to change our name. It's one of the few secular names that crosses Ashkenazi and Sephardic lines. Israel ben Hillel Safran, and the secular name of Raul Safran, after Raul Amundsen. To grow up Jewish in that place, in that time of war, if one survived, is also to be named, in time, Roald Margulies and Roald Hoffman. In Zlochov there once lived a great Hasidic rabbi, Yechiel Mechel, the Maggid of Zlochov. Martin Buber retells the following story. The Maggid of Zlochov was asked by one of his disciples, in the book of Elijah we read Everyone in Israel is duty-bound to say, when will my work approach the work of my fathers, of Abraham, of Isaac, and Jacob? How are we to understand this? How could we ever venture to think that we could do what our fathers could? The rabbi expounded. Just as our fathers invented new ways of serving, each a new service according to his own character, one the service of love, the other that of stern justice, the third that of beauty. So each one of us in his own way shall devise something new in the light of the teachings and of service, and do what has not yet been done. To do what has not yet been done in the light of the teachings and of service, that's to be Jewish. And looking to the future, out of the past. Oh, it's not a sufficient definition of being Jewish, but perhaps something to which a Jew, observant or not, on the anguished yet proud line from Yehiel Mechel to my